As we reported earlier, Israel and Hamas are working to negotiate a ceasefire. The U.S. Secretary of State is applying all the diplomacy possible to keep the conflict from spreading, and President Biden is cajoling and pressuring the Israeli leader to hold off on attacking the last Hamas stronghold. Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, has spent most of his career writing about national security and the American presidents who try to shape and react to world events, and he joins me now. Jeffrey, it's good to have you.
Thank you.
I want to ask you if you have a theory of the case of where U.S. foreign policy with respect to Israel and Gaza might have gone wrong before October 7th. In other words, there was a period where U.S. presidents, frustrated by years and years of diplomacy and trying to find a solution to the Middle East issue, kind of thought, we got to go deal with Asia, we got to go deal with other problems. Was that a mistake? Is what we're seeing now a mistake, that there was lack of attention?
You know, there's a very American response to problems in the world, which is that every problem comes with a solution. That's a very American and wonderful way we look at things, but it doesn't sometimes work. Sometimes problems just don't have solutions. And there were a lot of presidents, a lot of negotiators who spent a lot of time trying to fix this problem once and for all. They failed because perhaps there is no solution. Now, you could still say that you could do mitigation all along the way. And perhaps it's possible, and this is obviously, people have done PhDs on this subject, so we're not going to get to it all right now, but you could say that if they didn't have such grandiose visions, one president after another, I'm going to bring peace to the warring children of Abraham, right, that they could have mitigated here, mitigated there, pressured the Israelis, pressured the Arabs, pressured the Palestinians toward policies that at least would kind of separate out the sides a bit more.
Because I'm trying to stumble us into a conversation of how we should think about it in the context of this presidential campaign.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you two questions. One is, given exactly what you just said, should we be very humble in the way we hear the promises of both candidates about what can be done going forward? And what would the difference be if Donald Trump were in office? How are his policies with respect to this any different than Biden's?
Well, this is what I would say about Donald Trump. Donald Trump scares Iran, which is the source of a lot of this, obviously, scares Iran, we believe, in ways that Joe Biden doesn't scare Iran. Now, the problem is that he scares them in part because no one knows what he's doing. So, like, you can easily escalate, you could easily de-escalate. It depends on the mood and whim. But I would say that the fact that Donald Trump comes in with no discernible policy except kind of intermittent aggression and anger is a very Middle Eastern way of approaching the Middle East, by the way. I mean, what I would say is that none of this is going to be solved as long as Iran, the current government of Iran, is supporting the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Kataib Hezbollah and other factions in Iraq, obviously Hamas in Gaza, and so on. It is just the source of a tremendous amount of anxiety. Then you already have a recalcitrant Israeli government that's giving Biden so much trouble. So the formula here is not, this is not ready for success.
Let's jump over to Ukraine really quickly.
Yes.
Donald Trump is reelected. Ukraine gets more money or doesn't?
No, I don't think so. Maybe that's just conventional wisdom on my part, but it just seems as if he not only doesn't want to support Ukraine, he doesn't want to support NATO. I mean, you know, the question undergirding your question is not does he support Ukraine? Is it does he just pull out of NATO? And when presidents can pull out of treaties if they want to, that would be seismic beyond measure. That would be the biggest thing to happen in Europe since the end of World War II.
Right. Although the Senate has tried to constrain presidents from doing that. Let me ask you as a final question, Jeffrey. It's big. And you wrote about the Obama foreign policy was don't do stupid stuff, not the word used. Hillary Clinton said that's not a foreign policy. With that hat on, what is the Biden doctrine? Have you seen, what is the discernible foreign policy approach to the world that you would associate with Biden's presidency? It's
hard to discern that's something that's totally consistent, but of course that's unfair to Biden because nothing in these messes is going to be totally consistent. But I would say that his gut is pro-democracy, right? I mean, he combined with a kind of sometimes callous realism. Afghanistan is a great example. Did not think we could win in Afghanistan, never really thought that we could win in Afghanistan, and just cut it off, right? Haven't paid the price for that yet from a national security perspective. We have paid the price from a human perspective on that. So I think there's a kind of realism combined with sentiment, positive sentiment toward Israel is one example, combined with an understanding, a pretty deep understanding that Putin, Xi, and Khamenei in Iran are the enemies of democracy and freedom.
Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you.